From start to finish, the Bible tells the story of a God who creates, watches humanity fall, and still sets up a way back. Before anything existed, there was no sound or shape. Then God's voice broke through the void. "Let there be light." The light split day and night. The sky stretched out, the seas pulled back, and the earth appeared. From the earth came plants, the heavens filled with stars, and the waters and fields came alive. But the plan wasn't complete yet. On the sixth day, God bent down to the dust and formed man, fragile on the outside, but alive when the breath of the eternal entered him. That's where our story began, marked by purpose and by choices that would carry consequences through the ages, involving kingdoms, covenants, and promises. If you want to follow the rest of this timeline and see where this story leads, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapters. Adam lived in Eden, surrounded by life, but there was still no one like him. After naming every animal, he saw God make him fall into a deep sleep, and from his rib form the woman. When he saw her, he recognized his own essence in her, and the two began to walk together through the garden, receiving visits from the Creator in the evening. There was order, peace, and harmony, but also one single restriction: not to touch the fruit of a certain tree. Then the serpent spoke to Eve. Desire grew, and her hand reached for what was forbidden. She ate and offered it to Adam, who ate as well. Instantly, the weight of guilt fell over them. God's voice called out, and they hid themselves. That's how paradise was closed off, guarded by an angel of fire. And from that act began a story marked by a fall and the search for restoration. All humanity would go on to feel the echo of that choice. After the fall, humanity began to spread out, and with it came Cain and Abel, the sons of Adam and Eve. The two grew up different. Abel took care of the animals, and Cain worked the soil. The day came for them to offer something to God. Abel brought the best of his flock. Cain brought what he had harvested. God looked with favor on Abel because he saw what was in his heart, but he didn't accept Cain's offering. Hurt turned into envy, and envy turned into rage. Even after being warned, Cain called his brother out to the field and there spilled innocent blood. It was the first crime, the first mourning. The generations that followed multiplied, and with them came wickedness. The earth, once fertile, became a stage for violence and corruption. Yet in the middle of so much darkness, one man stood out: Noah. Righteous, blameless, he walked with God while everyone else turned away. Then came the unexpected command: to build an ark, even with no clouds in the sky, even far from the sea. And Noah simply obeyed. For many years he built the ark under mocking eyes, hearing neighbors laugh at a judgment they couldn't see. But the plan wasn't just to save a family, it was to preserve life. And so, 2 by 2, they started to arrive. Wild cats from the forest, swift birds, crawling reptiles, gentle oxen, and fierce beasts, all male and female, exactly as commanded. Then the sky broke open. Hidden springs burst from below. Clouds split apart for 40 days and 40 nights. Mountains disappeared. Towns were swallowed up. Voices went silent under the weight of the water, and only the ark stayed afloat. Inside was a core: people, promise, and future. When the waters went down, the hull touched land, and a dove returned carrying a green sign of hope. But time passed, and humans grew again, in number and in pride. Speaking the same language and feeding the same arrogance, they gathered on a plain and decided to build a tower to make their names last forever. Not just bricks, but vanity stacked against the sky. Each block sent a message: we don't need to be guided, we'll reach the heights on our own. And the top would be proof of it. But God looked at the work of men and saw that their unity didn't come from devotion, but from pride that wanted to reach the heavens. Then something changed. Their languages split, commands lost their meaning, and hands that once worked together suddenly couldn't understand one another. Shouts echoed, tools dropped, and the project stopped halfway. That tower, a symbol of their own greatness, became a mark of dispersion. Each group went its own way. Each people built their own altar. Each nation invented its own version of divinity. Truth was scattered around the world like the pieces of a broken vase. It was in this scene of confused voices that God spoke to just one man, and he listened: Abraham. God didn't call him to build walls, but to walk. He promised to make him into a great nation. With no map and no human guarantees, he left home and safety behind, crossing deserts guided only by a voice. Time went by, age weighed on him. Sarah's womb stayed empty, but faith didn't give in. And when the impossible seemed final, Isaac was born, a living promise. Abraham's obedience became the foundation for kings, prophets, and the entire story of redemption. It was God starting over, not with bricks, but with trust. Many generations later, another man would be put to the test. Joseph, sold by his own brothers, was taken as a slave to Egypt, a foreign land. There, staying faithful and attentive to what God revealed, he interpreted dreams, gained respect, and was placed by Pharaoh as governor, the second highest authority in the empire. When he already had power in his hands, the same brothers who had betrayed him stood before him, hungry and unaware of who he was. Time passed. Joseph's descendants grew, multiplied, and became a large people. But the Egypt that once welcomed them turned into a place of oppression. Slavery, hard labor, and whippings made their cry rise up to God. Then the Lord raised up Moses, the man who left the palaces to obey the call. Standing before Pharaoh, he declared, "Let my people go." When the king hardened his heart, God sent signs and plagues until the release was granted. But right after their freedom, the people found themselves trapped between the sea and the Egyptian army. Moses raised his staff, and God made a way through the impossible, with walls of water on both sides, so they could cross toward freedom. That crossing wasn't the end of the story, but the beginning of a journey guided by God's promise, who brought them out of slavery to form a nation set apart for him. The God who hears the cries of those who suffer is the same one who opens paths where the eye only sees walls. When the sea was behind them, the people entered the desert carrying on their bodies the marks of slavery, but in their hearts, the memory of the promise. They were free, but they still had to learn how to live as a nation set apart, led by the Lord. That's why they camped in front of the holy mountain. There, the deliverer who had acted with power would now speak with authority. The mountaintop smoked, thunder broke the silence, and the people waited in awe. God called Moses to come up, and he stayed 40 days and 40 nights before the glory. Then the Lord gave him the tablets of the covenant, written by his own hand. Not just simple commands, but words that revealed his divine character and showed the way of life. This code would shape the identity of that people among all other nations, teaching them how to walk with God and how to treat one another, marking every step with the sign of the covenant. The years went by, and when Moses finished his mission and rested, another leader had to take the lead. Joshua, marked by courage, faithfulness, and unwavering obedience, received the mantle and stepped in front of the people. He knew he wasn't just leading a nation tired of the desert, but heirs to a promise made long before in the days of Abraham. But before they could enter their inheritance, Jericho stood before them, a closed city with high walls, unreachable by human effort. Then God showed that his strategy doesn't follow human logic. Instead of swords, silence. Instead of attack, trumpets. For 6 days, Israel simply marched around the city. On the 7th day, at the sound of the trumpets and the people's shout, the walls came down. It wasn't military power, it was faith. From that moment on, Israel began to take possession of what had been promised. But God still needed to shape the hearts of the people. Because conquering land was just one step. Learning to depend on the Lord and live according to his direction was the true process that was just beginning. In a time of tension when leaders rose up and the people searched for direction, a young man no one expected stepped into God's story. He wasn't a trained soldier or a battle hero. On the other side stood a colossal warrior who mocked Israel day after day. Who's going to face me? The army stayed silent until David showed up with a sling, 5 stones, and a confidence that didn't come from strength, but from the God who had already protected him from lions and bears. He launched the stone, and in a single moment the giant fell. The victory didn't come from size, but from faith. David became proof that God uses ordinary people to bring down giants, and that young shepherd with a harp would later sit on the throne, strengthening Israel with his victories and his devotion. His story showed that the same God who honors courage in the valley is the one who opens doors in the palace, lifting up the unlikely to carry out his purposes among his people. The legacy of that king wasn't limited to battles. His deepest impact was spiritual, because from his house came Solomon. If the father brought down giants by trusting God, the son had to face something even greater, leading an entire nation. Still very young, realizing that the throne required more than strength or strategy, he stood before the Lord. He could have asked for wealth, long life, or victories, but instead he chose to ask for wisdom to govern the people of Israel. God saw that humility and answered. Solomon became known for his fair judgments and for a wisdom that amazed kings and queens from distant lands. Israel lived through a time of unusual peace and beauty, but the abundance didn't last. Little by little, the people's hearts drifted away, even after they had witnessed God's glory in the temple. Then the Lord raised up prophets, ordinary men with a voice that came from heaven, but almost no one listened to them. The siege came, Jerusalem fell, and many were taken into exile in Babylon. Even then, God remained attentive to his people. Even far from the promised land, many held on to their faith. Daniel was one of them. He lived in Babylon, but his loyalty belonged to God. That's why he faced the lion's den, and that night the mouths of the beasts were shut. His friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, refused to bow to the king's image. They were thrown into a blazing furnace, but the fire didn't touch them. Someone was with them in the flames, someone whose presence resembled the Son of God. The captivity, harsh as it was, didn't drive the Lord away. Among fire and decrees, his faithfulness stood firm, solid like refined metal. The exile, far from ending the story, became the soil where hope took root and stood strong against the winds of doubt. Among ruins and tears, the prophets kept God's whisper alive in the midst of chaos. The light would return. They spoke of a Messiah, not an ordinary ruler or a warrior with weapons, but a servant who would take upon himself guilt and injustice, bringing healing. And then, on a quiet night under the sky of a small village called Bethlehem, the ancient promise took form and began to walk among us. He didn't arrive with trumpets, but with the breath of a child and tiny steps that would, little by little, change the course of the world. It wasn't in thrones or noble halls, but in a simple shelter, surrounded by the smell of hay and the breath of animals, that the one who would change the course of history came into the world. That night, the Eternal stepped into our time. The invisible God took on a human face. The light was turned on, and with it came the real chance of restoration. Jesus walked through forgotten villages and crowded cities, surrounded by people hungry for bread, and even more for purpose. With just a word, the wind grew still. The forces of nature recognized his voice. But there was a greater sign than any miracle. He loved. He loved those who failed, those who were cast aside, those who denied him, and those who hurt him. From the place of pain, he released forgiveness when everyone expected condemnation. He showed that the kingdom of God isn't built by human strength. It starts within, in a surrendered heart, in grace received, in forgiveness given, in justice lived out every day. That was the message behind every act. No matter how far someone had gone, there was a way back, because the king himself had drawn near first. And that way began there, quiet but powerful, for anyone willing to listen. But the kingdom he announced, so different from human systems, wasn't accepted by everyone. His boundless love bothered those who claimed to know the law. His words exposed those in power, and his willingness to serve broke apart the logic of control. Then came the moment he had come for. He was betrayed, not by an open enemy but by someone at his own table, someone who had shared his bread. Judas Iscariot handed him over to those who hated him. What followed was the darkest night, an unjust trial, false witnesses, a council choosing lies, and a governor washing his hands without washing his guilt. The same crowd that once praised him now called for his death. At Golgotha, they nailed him to a cross between thieves, crowned him with thorns, and mocked his authority. Wounded and exposed, he still prayed, "Father, forgive them." And while the soldiers divided his clothes and the crowd watched, he stayed faithful to his purpose. Nothing turned him away. There, suspended between heaven and earth, he gave up his spirit. The veil tore, the ground shook, and the Son of God died. He didn't stay in the tomb. On the third day before dawn, the stone was rolled away, and the place where they had laid him was empty. Jesus rose again, alive and glorified, triumphing over sin, over death, and over every power of darkness. The cross, which many saw as defeat, was actually the starting point. There began the reconciliation between God and humanity. A new covenant was born, sealed by blood and sustained by grace, and the way of salvation was opened. Centuries later, one of his disciples, now old and isolated on the island of Patmos, received a breathtaking revelation. John saw seals being broken, each one releasing judgments upon the earth. He heard trumpets shaking kingdoms. He witnessed beasts rising and a dragon waging war against the saints. He saw the cry of the martyrs, the bowls of wrath, and the great final battle. Then came the divine declaration, "I am making all things new. God will wipe away every tear. There will be no more death, no mourning, no pain. The time of separation will come to an end, and the redeemed will live forever before the throne, in the full presence of the one who reigns." From creation to the promised end, the Bible reveals God's plan to form a people, rescue those who were lost, and restore all things in Christ. It's the Father who calls, the Son who gives himself, and the Spirit who stays and leads. Every page points to the same truth. Jesus will return, and eternity will come with him, ending pain and beginning a life made whole. In this series, we'll connect the past, present, and future through the light of the Word. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications so you don't miss any episode, and walk with us.